kindly avoided this last week. He didn't want to start on the text on submissive wives. We're going to read, we're going to read 1 Peter chapter 3, 1 through 9, which actually covers the husband part. I don't expect that we're going to get into the part about the husbands this morning. I'll leave that possibly to whoever's teaching next Sunday, Bible class. But let's start with Janet. We'll go back, read 2 verses apiece. We'll read 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 1 through 9.
Wives, likewise be submissive to your own husbands, that even if some do not obey the word, they without a word may be won by the conduct of their wives, when they observe your chaste conduct accompanied by fear.
Do not let your adornment be merely outward, arranging the hair, wearing gold, or putting on fine apparel. Rather, let it be the hidden person of the heart, with the incorruptible beauty and the gentle and quiet spirit, which is very precious in the sight of God.
For in the past, the holy women who put their hope in God also beautified themselves in this way, submitting to their own husbands, just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. You have become her children when you do what is good and are not frightened by anything alarming.
Husbands likewise dwell with them with understanding, giving honor to the wife as to the weaker vessel, and as being heirs together of the grace of life, and that your prayers may not be hindered. Finally, all of you be of one mind, having compassion for one another, love as brothers, be tender-hearted, be courteous.
Not rendering evil for evil or revealing for revealing, but counterwise blessing, for hereunto were ye called, that ye should inherit a blessing.
All right, so this text is talking about the godly living of husbands and wives. So starting out with wives, but this whole study that we've had in 1 Peter so far, we've already talked about how we are to be as children of God, how we're supposed to be before God, right? The attitude we're supposed to be towards God, be in submission to God before the world, as a citizen, right? So as a citizen to the government, are we under submission to the government? That's a yes, right? Are we under submission, talked about last week, to our employers? Yes. So now we get into chapter 3, and in the New American Standard that I have, it says in the same way. I think in some it says likewise. So taking that same thought from chapter 2 now into chapter 3, they go into be submissive for wives, be submissive to your own husbands in the same way. So in the same way that you're submissive to your employers, that you're submissive to the government, women, wives, be in subjection to your husband. So is that a mindset? That's an attitude, right? I mean, who controls your attitude? Do I? No. So we each control our own attitudes, and in this case, talking about wives. So the attitude that you have as, let's take women, wives, the attitude, women, if you do work, if you have work, or to the government, the attitude that you have to being in subjection in that way shouldn't be any different than it is to your husband in this context. So be submissive to your own husbands. Anybody here have more than one husband? No, one's enough, right? So you're not in subjection to somebody else's husband, right? You're not in subjection to your sister's husband or your mother's husband, even though he's your father. You're in subjection to your husband. So that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives. So when we talk about the behavior, are we talking about actions, or are we talking about words? Well, both, right? But actions speak louder than words, right? You can say something and not do it, right? Now it should be you can say something and mean it, and you should, and you should actually should back up the words that you say. So how can women be in subjection to their husbands, Janet?
Well, I guess I just took this totally different. I took this that it's either a Christian or a non-Christian, meaning without a word, maybe won by the conduct of, like if it's a non-Christian husband, that he's won to Christ by the conduct of his wife.
Correct.
Maybe I took that wrong.
No, that's right, and I'm just not going there yet.
Oh, sorry.
We'll get there, but for right now, I wanted to focus on Christian. Thanks for the clarification to the husband, right? Is that as Christian wives being, in subjection to your Christian husband, but also being Christian wives being in subjection to your husband, whether he's a Christian or not. Mark?
Well, I was going to say it's important to point out in these discussions because, especially in the times God set this order after the fall of the garden, and some people may not be happy about that. But there's nothing we can do about that. God set that order because the woman transgressed first. She was put in subjection to her husband by God, not by the man. So it's important that we understand that. The people who don't care about God, that's not going to matter. But the people who do care about God and want to draw near to God need to understand that that was the order that He established. And we have to just follow that.
Any other thoughts on Mark's comment? So, this isn't my view. This is, we're reading from God's word, and this is the plan that God laid it out. But is it easy to? Just like we talked about last week, is it easy to be in subjection to your husband, whether your husband's a Christian or not? Is it easy to be in subjection to your husband if they're not being the husband that they should? No.
The key of it is the husband has to be the leader. He has to set the example.
Right, and we'll get to that when we get to the husband. Then the husband's to lead and set the example. However, if he's not leading, if your boss is not being what he should be, should you still be the employee? We said last week, yes, you should be.
You should be. Yeah.
In the same case this way, the wife should still be in subjection as long as what?
Yeah, I was just going to make that point. As long as it isn't in violation with God's law.
Right. And that's great when, I can start reading people's minds. and as long as, right, the husband is not asking the wife to violate, to sin, to do something, outside of, what she should be doing as a wife. Now, is this only a Christian wife who should be in subjection to her husband? No. Wives are to be in subjection to their husbands. Now, we're talking about, as far as being won. Now, you can't win somebody if you're not a Christian, right? You can't win somebody over if you're a wife and you're not a Christian. You can't win over your husband who's not a Christian either. Now, you could be a good example still, but we're not talking about that in this case. So that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives. So how can the behavior of a wife, husbands, I like to hear the comments from the men right now, how can your wife, if she's wasn't a Christian or not a Christian, how can she win you over? How could she influence you in obeying the gospel if you're not a Christian or weren't a Christian? How could she influence you by the actions, the way she acts as a wife? Dave?
By continually being faithful, no matter what.
And that's something obviously that as a husband you notice, right? And how many times does it take for her not to be in that having that attitude for you to notice, oh, well, you're not what you say you are.
Never know how long it'll take.
Right. It may take a long time, and that's like all of us. If we, we can be towing the line, and all of a sudden we step out of line one time, and somebody sees that and says, you're not who you say you are. Well, we're not perfect, right? And we need to own up for our mistakes, sins, when we make those. But from a husband standpoint, if I'm being out of line and my wife's being in line all the time, I notice that. I should notice that. And I should notice that. And she should, even without a word, it says, I should notice that the way she's living is telling me I'm not living right? Or, she can put me in my place by her actions of being a chaste woman, and being the way that she should be. So I should, as a husband, notice that, and that's what this text is saying. Even without a word, I can be won. And I'm sure that's happened, plenty of times to men who've married Christian women, and they weren't a Christian, and they eventually won them over. It's like, my mother goes to services every Sunday, and usually not on Wednesday. She's 87, and her husband, my stepdad, takes her there. He's not a Christian. He takes her there every time that she feels like it. And he may never obey the gospel, but he sees that every time she feels like it, and every time the doors are open, he's taking her, and she's telling him he knows it's time to go. Right? I take you on at this time. And so at least the influence is there, whether he ever makes the choice or not. But the point is here that
you could go to a lot of study habits, like you're saying, or attendance. It's so many things. A good mother, how she treats her children, the way she teaches her children. There's so many good examples that women can use, to influence others.
And that means that you're seeing all those things, and the only reason you're seeing all those things is because you're at home seeing those things, right? You can't be gone all the time, or you can't have a job that takes you away all the time, so that you're never spending any time at home, and that the wife is basically doing both, playing both roles. So, any other questions here on verse 1, and then we'll get into verse 2, and we can always go back to verse 1 if somebody wants to go there. So, as they observe your chaste and respectful behavior, which we've already been talking about, but the husband, that's puts responsibility on the husband. He needs to observe, right? And he can't observe if he's not there, right, with the family and with the wife to observe these things. So verse 3, your adornment must not be, now this is New American Standard, your adornment must not be merely external. It doesn't mean it can't be external, but shouldn't be the focus. Braiding the hair and wearing gold jewelry and putting on dresses. So your adornment must not be merely, right? But number 4, let it be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable quality of gentle and quiet spirit, who is precious in the sight of God. So what I wanted to do here is just maybe make a little chart here and put like a couple of different categories. Like this would be physical, and this would be inner. So let's call this adornment, which would be so from a physical side, what things might a woman do from a physical standpoint? Was the physical things that say that, just because you do this in a physical way doesn't mean it's not okay to do that, right? It shouldn't be the focus. The inner self is what this says, and then we'll look at the inner self. What are the things you should do? So be thinking, what are some of the things from an inner standpoint, but let's go with physical standpoint. So when women adorn themselves physically, what are some of the things that they do and that they focus on? Like I've got my hearing aids in, but I can't hear that well.
Hair.
Hair? Yeah. Janet is mentioning that her hair's not growing in as fast as she would like it to be, but it's starting to do that.
Clothes.
Clothes?
Jewelry.
Probably enough to get us started. All right, so contrast that then to what are some of the inner things. Now, these are obviously not seen physically, internally. I can't see what's inside you, but I can see your actions. I can see the way you act. Other people can as well. So what are the kind of things that, from an inner standpoint, a woman should be adorning herself with as a Christian?
Be humble.
Humility. And you get that at the store, the humility store? Humility R Us, you don't get it there?
Kindness.
Kindness? Thoughtfulness? GHT. I mean, that's right.
When I read this, it always makes me think of, we've all met people physically that you're just like, outwardly they are the most amazing looking individual you've ever seen. But then when you get to know them, they're so ugly inside that it actually alters their appearance in your eyes. On the outside, they're just ugly to you. But then you've met people that really aren't that attractive, but they have those inner qualities that are so incredible. They're attractive. And I mean, I really think that's kind of what that is. You just see that inner beauty. Hey, lucky you if you get both.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Since it's inner, we'll just put inner beauty just because. Let that kind of capture everything that you see in somebody because of that. So this text, our adornment should not be merely external. Now, all of the women here did something externally to themselves today. You got ready, you got dressed, right? So merely external, but you didn't. It's not your focus, right, for being here. It's not your focus for being a Christian woman. So let it be the hidden person of the heart. So I can't see, any of us can't see your hearts, what's going on in your hearts this morning, but we do see your actions. And so, instead of saying these, now, is it obvious sometimes when this is the focus?
Yes.
Right.
Because you don't see the inner at all.
Right, and sometimes people let you know that this is their focus, right? Because it's hard not to see that from what you see. Now, somebody could have a lot of these, but this could overshadow that, right? And to the point, there's a lot of this, and they're trying to do this, but this, for some reason, just like we can't serve two masters. Same with the physical side and the spiritual side. We can't serve two. So this should always be the focus, of the wife.
Yeah, it's interesting when you have that lined up there because the physical is temporary, but the inner is eternal. Those things are going to endure forever.
Well, and at what point do mothers and fathers start teaching these, right? I mean, when you're talking about with children, and I'm talking daughters, but sons and daughters, but talking daughters here. When you're raising a child, you're teaching them be kind. You're teaching them to share. You're teaching these, for one, hopefully from your example to them about how they should be building these things in a young girl who's eventually going to grow up into, a wife and to somebody. Hopefully that these things have been cultivated through their upbringing, that these things, are there, and they don't have to try to build these things themselves. Now that can be the case where they, a young girl wouldn't get any kind of upbringing like this. It doesn't mean that she can't have this as a Christian woman. But these are the things that are, these are attitudes. These are things that we have to, as Christians, we need to bring children up in this kind of these kind of characteristics, Janet.
I mean, unfortunately, today we have what's called social media, and it basically is all left, not right. And also, the first 2 or 3 verses that we've read here, they don't. I mean, for us to be submissive to our husband, that's like, not right. You should be equal and all that. So I mean, I feel, I don't want to say sorry, but I mean, today's parents that have young children really have to to me, work harder than our parents did, because they've got this huge monster called social media that's basically counteracting everything they're trying to teach. You just got to try to keep kids off of it. I mean, it's
right. I didn't see anybody put a quick and smart wit on here, right? Being able to fire back a zinger at somebody when they say something to you, and you can zing it back, to them. We don't see that, but you see that a lot on social media. Somebody says something, somebody else fires something back without really thinking. You can see all of a sudden what their thoughts are. Whereas, thoughtfulness, maybe not saying anything at all, kindness, humility, those kind of things. It's tough to show those kind of things a lot on social media. You can be kind in your words, but you see a lot more of the opposite of this on social media than what you see here. So the physical is not what women are supposed to focus on. It should be the inner. And I mean, is that something that women? I mean, you can speak. I'm not going to speak. Men should do the same. But is it something you can cultivate? I mean, it's an attitude, right? So it's something that you have to work on, right? None of us are born, with knowing exactly where we need to be. There's always the goal of where we want to be, but it takes time, and we're always on that journey to try to better. And women should be on the same one here, to be more of these kind of things and less of this.
But it's like all of us, Jim. We all need to find a proper example when it comes to that, whether it's man or woman. If you see someone that has those traits, then that's something you should be looking at and saying, that's the example that I need.
Right, and not only that, but as we're teaching our children here, our sons and daughters, but this is what, bringing up your son, we've got a lot of little boys here, bringing up your son, this is what they need to look for, in a wife. Not this. You need to find this. If you get this, if you get some beauty with this, hopefully you're in love with the person. So, but this is what you see, and so you don't want to marry this and not get this. That's going to be a long life.
And you're not teaching them without the example in your home. If you're not possessing those qualities, you're not going to teach those to your children. They have to see that in the home.
You mean you can't say A and do B?
Yeah.
Right. Because children, children at a very young age start realizing, oh, you say this, but you mean that, right? You do this. You want me to do this, but you do that. And so, it's, as a parent, we understand how God's relationship is to his children as us when we, might play that same role as what a child sees as well there. So any other comments here on 3 and 4? We can go back to some of these. So verse 5, for in this way in former times the holy women also who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, being submissive to their own husbands, just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord, and you have become her children if you do what is right without being frightened by any fear. So Sarah obeying Abraham, that's an example. She called him Lord. That's a sign of what?
Respect.
Right, it's a sign of respect for him as her husband. So we have examples, not just of people around us, and I'm sure a lot of you have examples of, women in your lives, whether they're, locally here or wherever, Christian women who, acted the way they should. And in here we see, women in the Old Testament here referencing Sarah obeyed Abraham. If you do what is right without being frightened by any fear. So why would you be frightened as a woman? Why would you be frightened by your husband for any kind of fear for doing what's right?
Maybe if it's the wrong kind of husband that's creating this fear. I mean, she shouldn't.
Right, just like we talked about last week with the employee-employer relationship. When you do the right thing all the time, are you always going to be rewarded in the right way? No, because you do the right thing, and we talked about, you could get fired, right, for doing the right thing. Just because you do the right thing and being submissive to your husband, does that mean that you're still going to be treated the way you should be? No. I've never, personally, I've never hit my wife. I know men do. And there's probably some Christian men, who hit their wives. Abuse, physical abuse. There's situations where you have to, either maybe remove yourself from the situation for a while, but you don't have, we don't see that out as a Christian wife. Adultery is the only reason for divorce. So somehow you've got to endure, and we talked about that, I think, talking about a husband and wife relationship. You've got to endure that, and so there could be some fear there. If I do what's right, I'm fearful of my husband. Bernice?
If you have a husband that's abusive, you can't leave the situation without being divorced, without getting a divorce.
You can leave the situation, but you don't have a scriptural reason for divorce.
That's what I'm saying, but you can still, you said endure. But you can leave and separate yourself, but still not get it. Not divorce.
Well, the scriptures say you can separate yourself for a while, but it doesn't say that you can just leave.
Oh, I thought you could.
Well, we can.
Was Ruth the example of that? And I think in the Old Testament, we have, I think she's been.
Let me go with Nancy first.
Well, leaving but getting some help for them is the main thing. That would be for a while, but once things start to turn around, then, you might be going back. But if you've got children and all, you don't want to ever leave them in that situation, ever.
All right. So what the text here is saying, you're doing what's right without having being frightened by any fear. So you shouldn't have any fear for doing what's right, right? Right. And who are we trying to please in our life on this earth? God, right? Not man, right? So even if I do what's right and I suffer for it, and we talked about that, as a Christian, did Paul suffer for that? Right? Many suffer for that. So by doing what's right, we may suffer, but we're not trying to please man on this earth. We're trying to please God by doing what we should. And in this case, the wife being who she should be
Sort of like
towards
what
God.
Robert said earlier, you know, if you're going to do what's right with God, and the husband's not on the same page, there's going to be, you know, consequences. You know, there will be trouble.
Which puts, we didn't really discuss this, which puts a lot of focus on marrying the right person, right? Not saying that there's one right person out there and you have to find that one right person, you know, in everybody that's out there in the United States, right? But, I mean, who are you looking for, right? Ultimately, you're going to marry somebody that you date. Unless, I mean, that's typically the way it works, right? So every date that you go on should be an opportunity to say either I should be with this person or I shouldn't be with this person, right? Because ultimately you're going to get into, you know, a dating situation where you're going to marry somebody. And if you don't think that person is somebody that you should be marrying, then why are you bothering going on the date, right?
Many years ago, Johnny Edwards told a video at our West. And he told our Bible class also. And he made a profound statement out of himself, not profound. He said, pay attention to the woman that you're going to marry if you're a guy. And said, if you're a woman, you pay attention to the guy and his family and his friends. See how they interact. He said, if he's the old man and they make fun of him all the time, you're going to have some of it come your way. So that was a piece of earthly wisdom that was transformed out there. And I think that's true to a large extent as to how the mother and the children that interact and the father that interact with each other.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of people who, you know, they don't do that. They marry when both of them are non-Christian. One becomes a Christian, and then now they're in a situation where one has found the truth, the other one hasn't. And if I had known what I know now about becoming a Christian, what it takes from a marriage standpoint, I wouldn't have married you to begin with, kind of thing. So that's a difficult situation as well. Like what Warren was talking about, I mean, that's a general truth. I mean, I'm sure all of us know somebody who's married somebody who came out of a poor situation, a bad family life, who straightened themselves up. And if you look at the situation on their family, you'd say, well, I don't know anything to do with that family. But that person brought themselves up out of that and, you know, are good Christian people, even though the rest of their family, they wouldn't have anything to do with. But just the point I was making is that at some point in time, you know, children, you know, when they start dating in high school or whatever, eventually you're going to marry somebody. And you need to figure out if the person that you're dating is the right person before you start dating them. You know, a lot of people say, well, I'm going to date, and then, you know, if I find that's not the situation, we'll get out of it. Well, sometimes you get too deep into it, and before you know it, you're married, and now you're in a situation you don't want to be in. That's kind of off track a little bit, so let's get back here. Maybe 5 minutes to wrap this up. And I didn't want to get into verse 7, so we're going to stay out of verse 7.
I just wanted to say it was Abigail and the ball.
Okay.
Yeah, and then that was the abuse.
That was yeah.
Yeah, Neil.
Now, I don't expect that from this discussion next Sunday we'll come in and no one will have makeup on, or no one will have their hair done, or, you know, ratty clothes and no jewelry, right? But these things that we talked about here are not just for women, but for men as well. But cultivating all these things in the world we live in, I mean, I'm sure it wasn't any different in Rome and, in the first century. These things are not the easiest things to work on when you're living in a society that doesn't care about these things, right? That's why when we're together, when we're with each other, it's a lot easier to be this kind of person. But when we're out in the world, it's not so easy. And when you're talking about wives, when I see these things from my wife, does that make me want to do more of that? When I see more kindness of my wife, not just showing it to me, but to showing it to a sister in Christ, does that make me want to be kind, to a brother in Christ? It should. I mean, it should rub off, right? Those kind of things should be good examples, just not just in here, but when we're with our spouse or with our, away, those kind of things should make us want to be better people. I mean, aren't we here to edify each other? Right. And we edify each other by our example and what we see from each other. Mark?
I was going to say, it's the right kind of letter to think about. It may not have an immediate response. I mean, we know it's a people that are married to individual that for years it didn't seem like any of that was that abusive. But then over time, it starts over the course of a life. Sometimes people are changed by it. But so you just can never discount just because you don't see an immediate result. Like I said, just it's the right kind of way. It starts out small.
Right, it's kind of like that little pebble in your shoe that is there, and it's just kind of it's there. It's that example to someone who's trying to resist those kind of things. Eventually, these kind of things rub off, like Mark said, on you because you're around it all the time. And if you consistently see that behavior from your wife, then those kind of things should rub off, on us. And likewise, when we get to next week for the men, a husband, his example being the husband that he should be, it makes it so much easier. If both are being the Christians that they should be, I mean, how great is that relationship between husband and wife? That's the way it should be. Christ loved the church, and we as children, followers of Christ, are so thankful for what he did. So if that relationship is what it should be, and it's the same between husband and wife, then God's pleased with us, and we should be happy, that we're in that situation with our spouse.
I think it's even more difficult for women to fall into this authority category because in the society we live in, it's looked down upon. And so even from other women out in the community, they look down and they frown. I know my family frowns on it. Yeah. And so it's just it makes it even harder for women to be in subjection to their husbands because women on the outside.
Society's not patting you on the back when they see that. Logan?
Right.
Oh yeah, I think it's important to note too that women aren't here described as being inferior or less valuable to God.
Right.
That it's just more the fact that the roles have been set and they're different from one another. And submission shouldn't be that uncomfortable of a topic for Christians, especially because we all submit to someone, and submission is something that God values greatly and is a characteristic from all of His Christians. So we all need to learn to submit in one way or another. So I think it's and sometimes when you talk to others about it, that you can kind of explain it in that type of light, and it may help them to see it a little better.
Right, just like we talked about last week with the employee-employer relationship. How successful can an employer be without having submissive employees who are following and doing the things that the employer or employment wants them to do? To be effective, those things have to work together. Bernice?
I think these days and times too that men aren't being like, it's a lot. I know a lot of men that look to live off of women that are not the providers, are not, you know, they're not stronger than the woman, you know.
Right, and so that's a great segue into next week. Next week we'll talk about whoever is teaching the class next week. I think it's not me. We'll be talking about that. So let's go ahead and close the session. We're thankful for your participation this morning and look forward to worship. Thank you.
Open this thing to work like it's supposed to.
Only been doing this time.